anybody.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I don't understand why you guys are trying so hard to avoid the obvious news of this week.
Was there something else in the news this week?
Sacks, if Trump actually had some material in Mar-a-Lago that was related to the nuclear program, and there was an attempt to try and recover those documents through normal means, and they were not recoverable, what would your course have been if you were the director of the FBI or the president of the U.S. in that condition? Because I think that seems to be the party line of what's going on here.
Well,
or the Democratic kind of spin on what's going on here. But honestly, in that circumstance, what do you think would have been appropriate? So there's some sort of confidential material related to our nuclear program or nuclear weapons, something there in those materials that were attempted to be recovered or were taken without approval, and then they tried to recover it. Assume there's no nefarious intent. What would be the right kind of course here?
Well, I don't know exactly what's going on. I just think that you can't necessarily give sadly, I don't think you can necessarily give the FBI the benefit of the doubt here in light of their history. But let's back up. I mean, first you had this raid on Mar-a-Lago where you got 30 FBI agents. They're not wearing suits with holstered sidearms. They're carrying AR-15s, weapons of war, fingers just outside the trigger guard. They're wearing body armor. It looks like a paramilitary raid on Mar-a-Lago. It's utterly unprecedented. And you look at tweets by Andrew Cuomo, for example, or Andrew Yang. I mean, these guys actually turn out to be pretty, I think, intellectually honest Democrats on this point, saying this is unprecedented and it's really going to. Here, I want to read this by
Why don't you
Andrew Yang. Hold on,
why don't you answer Friedberg's question?
I'm getting there. I know you're going to cut me off, so I'd like to just read these tweets. So maybe maybe you'll give more credence to Andrew Yang. He said, "I'm no Trump fan. I want him as far away from the White House as possible. But a fundamental part of his appeal has been that it's him against a corrupt government establishment. This raid strengthens that case for millions of Americans who will see this as unjust persecution." You have Andrew Cuomo saying, "DOJ must immediately explain the reason for its raid. It must be more than a search for inconsequential archives or be viewed as a political tactic and undermine any future credible investigation and legitimacy of January 6 investigations." And let me read one other tweet by Elon that's not directly about this, but he tweeted this on July 11th, so a month ago. And he said, "I don't hate the man, but it's time for Trump to hang up his hat and sail into the sunset." That was the part that was widely reported. But he also said, "Dems should also call off the attack. Don't make it so that Trump's only way to survive is to regain the presidency." I think there was a lot of wisdom in that. And, I'm old enough to remember when the case for Biden getting elected is we have to move past this partisan warfare, this extreme rancor and derangement. And we were told that the media, all these people who had TDS, that their psychosis was due to Trump. And if we could just move past Trump, all this sort of partisan warfare would end. And now, and I was certainly hoping that would be true. And now, sadly, it seems like we're right back in this thing, where we're right back with the media being obsessed with TDS, portraying this narrative that somehow he's a traitor. And what does this whole thing hang on? Just these two words, nuclear documents. Well, listen, until they actually produce those documents, I'm going to suspend judgment, because the FBI, the last time they did this, remember, they manufactured a falsified warrant to the FISA court for this type of investigation. They have that history. So I'm just going to suspend judgment on what's going on here until they actually produce the documents they're talking about.
So, Sacks, can I ask,
this stinks.
Do you honestly question the integrity of leadership and agents of the FBI?
Are you serious? Like, you don't think?
Yeah.
All right, let me read you this tweet from Michael Burry.
I don't want to hear the tweet. I want to hear your point of view.
No. Well, I agree with what Michael Burry is saying. So I think sometimes there's a lot of thoughtful commentary about this. And what Burry says is J. Edgar Hoover led the FBI for 5 decades, denied the mafia existed, fought the civil rights movement, shielded the KKK. Multiple presidents acknowledged fear of him. So what he's saying is that the FBI, since its inception, has political origins. And basically meddled politically in the affairs of the country. Then he says, the FBI lied to the FISA court. This is back in 2016. Totally true. Altered emails, leaked lies to the press to get Trump. Nothing shocking. So, Friedberg, listen, I don't know whether the FBI is telling the truth, but are you honestly going to say that the FBI's leadership has never been political, that has never harbored or pursued their own agenda, and that it's never had a desire to go after Trump.
I'm not making an opinion.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
We saw the text messages from Comey, Strzok, Page, McCabe. I mean, these guys basically took it upon themselves when Trump was elected to be the quote unquote insurance policy.
Yeah.
And an FBI lawyer pled guilty to falsifying documents to seek a warrant from the FISA court. So I just think anything's possible here. And now, I'm not saying the FBI is lying about this. I don't know. But the idea that the FBI is automatically entitled to the benefit of the doubt in light of their proven history of basically pursuing Trump like Ahab pursued the white whale. I mean, these guys have been after him.
I'm just going to zoom out for a second. The reason I'm interrogating Sacks on this is like, it's just so telling to me that a guy like you, Sacks, in your position are actually questioning the integrity of like the highest justice authority and institution in the United States. Really says a lot about kind of the state of the U.S. citizenry, the state of our society today. I think it speaks a lot to...
At least a third of Americans.
I know, it's incredible. And what Ray Dalio said in his book about how during these periods when the empires begin their decline, and when you're challenged with kind of the economic conditions that the U.S. is challenged by, printing lots of money, lots of debt, very hard to service all that debt, and we have a ton of obligations over the next decade or two that are going to be very hard to meet given our economic growth and inflation conditions right now, that you start to see these sorts of behaviors historically. It's happened 6 times in the last 500 years, where large empires like the United States or large economic powerhouses like the United States start to decline, that the civil war begins, that the institutions get challenged by a minority and then a majority of the citizenry. And it really starts to crumble and challenge the integrity of the institution and its ability to hold itself together.
Well, I'm not. Hold on a second. I'm not challenging. Hold on a second. I'm not.
Well, you're questioning the integrity. You're questioning the integrity of the Department of Justice, right?
Listen.
By the way, I'm not arguing. I'm just pointing out, like, it's an incredible condition for us to find ourselves in.
Yeah, but my questioning did not create that condition. This lack of trust is earned. It's earned by the FBI in light of behaviors they took just a few years ago. Now, listen, I'm not defending Trump per se. I don't know what he did or didn't do, okay? But I think that you can't just accept at face value without further proof these leaked, what are basically leaked comments by the FBI.
Yeah,
I mean, look, I'm not a naive child. I mean, the fact of the matter is that power can be corrupt and power corrupts, okay? And we have seen that the FBI from its earliest days did engage in corruption, and more recently against Trump himself, had a vendetta against Trump. So hold on. So all I'm doing is I'm not going to automatically accept at face value what they're saying until I see some proof. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong or they're lying about this. I'm simply saying I'm not going to accept it at face value.
Yeah, and remember, Trump was elected on the platform that there is this deep state, that there is institutional corruption, that there is malaise and lethargy in these institutions of the government that are funded on the order of trillions of dollars a year, and that's what he was intended to go and blow up and repair. And there's a very strong and potentially close to majority percentage of voting Americans that feel that there is this core deep state corruption, institutional lethargy that is challenging our ability to give everyone the freedom and liberties that they deserve.
Friedberg, these agencies are supposed to be nonpartisan. They're not supposed to have a horse in the race. And what we saw is that when Trump was in office and these texts came out, clearly the top levels of the FBI, these top agents, I'm not talking about the rank and file, I'm not talking about the field agents. I understand that a lot of them are law and order types who vote Republican. I get it. But I'm talking about the leadership, the highly political leadership in Washington. And it was pretty clear that they had a horse in the race. They did not like Trump and they were out to get Trump. And, again, Trump is not my preferred candidate for 2024. But what the FBI has done with this raid, quite frankly, I think has polarized the outcomes. They are basically going to send Trump to the big house or the White House. I mean, because now the Republicans have rallied around Trump. I think he's going to be very, very hard to beat as the nominee in 2024 unless the FBI comes up with ironclad evidence to show that he did something significantly wrong.
I care less about who did what and what was done wrong. I care more about the fact that this conflict is escalating and it's creating a real condition of continuing polarization. And it really is the conditioning that, Biden had some historians in the White House. There was a report on this last week. And these historians spoke about how the conditions in the United States are just as they were right before the Civil War. And that there's real concern.
As measured how?
You can go read the anecdotal reporting that was done on this thing, but that was the general theme of the conversation. And, it really kind of concerns me more that this level of discourse is escalating to a point of, there's corruption, this person is a criminal. And that sort of discussion happens, in more dire circumstances and more in economic circumstances than has ever been seen. The U.S. is the largest economy in history, and we're now having these sorts of conversations that typically lead to some degree of conflict, and it's really concerning.
I just think, listen, I think that Trump was out of office. We were told that this partisan rancor would stop once he was out, and it's, they're pulling him back in. And all I can say is that I think we know maybe 1% of the story. Okay. I think this leak around nuclear documents it feels like a selective leak. It's not certainly the full story.
All sides are inflammatory. All sides are cantankerous.
I'm suspending judgment. What I'm saying is, though, that when all the information comes out, there better be a very significant there.
No. We've made that impossible too, because Trump came out and he basically said, hey, listen, if these guys find something, it was planted. And now you're going to have at least 10 or 15% of the population that believes, okay, this was planted. It wasn't actually there. And, so whatever the outcome is, will not be good. Nobody will be satisfied. And both of the extremes in the United States will be even more angry.
Further inflamed, yeah.
Inflamed.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
The inflammatory index has now skyrocketed, yeah.
By the way, this is why I think at some level, maybe the lack of faith in these institutions is well deserved, because where is the prudence of all of this? Like, where is the circumspect, thoughtful, methodical thinking about all of the different outcomes that could be possible, so that you exhaust every option and this is the only option left? And then even then, if Merrick Garland was open to basically saying, unseal the warrant, why didn't you do it before and say, we're going to have to serve this guy unless he actually gives us these things? There's all kinds of things you could have done.
Oh, clearly they did
hold on a second, to keep the temperature of this thing way, way down. And that's what's
and to your point, Chamath, they could have let Trump's lawyers watch them do the search so that nobody could claim anything about anything being planted.
Yeah.
So they didn't let that happen either.
The inflammatory index is spiking. I think that's my key takeaway on all of this. I care less about what Trump did and what the DOJ did and what the FBI did. But I'm more concerned about where this takes us, because the next step, regardless of the outcome,
where it takes us. It takes us. When you're on tilt at the poker table, what do? You cannot think properly.
That's right. That's where everyone's at right now. Yeah.
When people are so inflamed with emotion, they start to make very poor decisions. I don't know whether the DOJ and Maine Justice made a poor decision or not. I think this is where we have to hold our breath and hope they didn't. I don't know whether the White House knew anything or not. But the whole point of all of this is that we pulled this guy right back in to the main stage.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, you've polarized the outcomes. You're either going to basically send this guy to jail, or you're going to send him to the White House.
No, I think there's very likely a middle path where nothing happens, right. But it will further erode what Friedberg says, which is it's just a little bit less trust in the DOJ.
Institutional integrity is eroding. And when institutional integrity erodes, the fabric of what keeps everything working starts to fall apart. And I'm not saying this is some cataclysmic civil war happening. Just to be clear, I'm not saying there's some cataclysmic civil war happening next year, but it's an unfortunate decline in everyone's faith and the stability of the institutions that we all rely on to support and service us, because the inflammatory index is going to go up and everyone's going to be criticizing everything. And that's a nasty place.
This is why I think we really have to ask, was this really necessary? I mean, why did the DOJ and the FBI think this was necessary?
Yeah, I think
these boxes were just sitting there.
I think that's a reasonable question, is like, if these things were actually sitting in a box with a lock that they changed, there must have been something more that was so grievous where you had to do something like this. Now, by the way, David, I read, so I don't know if it's true or not. I think maybe it was in Barry Weiss's Substack or Matt Taibbi's Substack, these folks weren't armed to the teeth. They came in jeans and shorts and t-shirts. In fact, Main Justice told them, like, do it as
No, I've seen the photos. I've seen the photos. They had
the photos outside. I'm saying the people inside were there for 6 or 7 hours, and only a few people knew about it.
They were there for 9 hours. They basically told Trump's people they couldn't be there. They had to leave. They told them to turn the cameras off, and they had like highly militarized guys. There were something like 40 people, and something like 30 of them were heavily armed. The optics were terrible.
If there was some confidential nuclear material in Mar-a-Lago, and through normal means of communication, they had asked several times to have it returned and identified this for him, and he had refused, which I think is a very reasonable kind of, conditioning for what may have happened here. And then they said, okay, we got to go get it. There's no choice. This is like super confidential nuclear material. We got to get this stuff. The only way to get it is to serve a warrant and go in there and get it. Under those circumstances, do you think that this would have been kind of inappropriate? Like, assume all other kind of communication means were exhausted. Like, what would you have done if you were president?
Listen, I think there is information that could still come out to convince me that this raid was warranted. I just haven't seen that information yet, and I think the optics of it were terrible. I like the point I was making. I don't know why it wouldn't have been good enough to send in the FBI agents with holstered sidearms, not AR-15 weapons of war, where the fingers were just outside the trigger guard. It looked like a paramilitary raid. So whoever was thinking about the political ramifications of this clearly didn't do a very good job. I also don't know.
Optics.
I also don't know why you wouldn't give the courtesy to a former president of the United States to give them either more of a heads up or to let his lawyers attend so that just for their own protection, so they can't be accused of planning anything. That would have been smart. And I don't know why they would have said to Trump's people that they couldn't record it. And I don't know why there have been reports that the FBI went through Melania's closet. I mean, seriously, they're like going through Melania's clothes. It's just weird. It's weird. So there's a lot about this that we don't know. I'm not conclusively rendering judgment about it because there are things that absolutely could come out to convince me that it was warranted. But I haven't heard them yet.
Okay, everybody, we'll see you on the next episode of the